Welcome to The Way Home, Crossnore Communities for Children's Facebook Live show, as well as our podcast. My name is Holly Kessler, and I'm the Senior Director of Community Relations at Crossnore. We are here every Tuesday afternoon talking with one or two of our staff members or maybe a community partner about the work that we do in North Carolina, the child welfare system, or maybe even ways that we are engaging in our community. If you miss our live show on Tuesday afternoons, you can always rewatch on Facebook or catch the show on our YouTube channel. The podcast comes out on Friday mornings on our blog at crossnore.org, and so you can listen there. There are plenty of ways to catch our show each week. I'm just glad that you're here with us. Today, my guests are Patrice Williams, Crossnore's Communications Manager, and BLAIR Johnston, our Executive Administrative Coordinator. So I want to say welcome to Patrice and BLAIR, and thank you for being here today.
Hi, thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Holly.
Absolutely. So I wanted to start with you guys introducing yourselves. Tell us a little bit about your role at Crossnore, because in addition to being Crossnore staff members, you guys are also foster and adoptive moms, which is what we're going to talk about today. So tell us a little bit about yourself and your family. Patrice, you want to start for us?
Sure. My name is Patrice Williams. I am the communications manager here at Crossnore. I'm based in our Winston-Salem office. And I began with Crossnore in December of 2018. I'm married to Matt. We've been married, I think, 18 years. And we have a 13-year-old biological son. And then we have 10-year-old Gideon, who we adopted through foster care.
Great. And how about you, BLAIR? Tell us about you.
Yeah, I've been at Crossnore for January will make 6 years.
Wow.
And in my almost 6 years, I've been lucky to have 4 jobs at Crossnore. And that's relevant because it plays a part in my story. But I came first as a cottage parent, and then I was transitioned into residential case management. Then I worked for a couple of years in the foster care and adoptions department here at Crossnore, and now I've landed as the executive administrative coordinator, which means that I work with Brett, who's our CEO, and Caroline, who's our external relations officer, as well as our deputy director. So kind of being their needs, their help, and whatever they need in their day-to-day.
All right. And you have some folks in your family too, right?
That's correct. Yeah. So we are a family of 5. My husband and I adopted 3 teenagers from foster care in 2020, which was a fun year to adopt.
Yeah.
And those children actually lived here at one point. So we initially met them here on campus.
And I'll just go ahead and say, if you can see Blair's face while this is watching, you'll know she's not quite old enough to be the mother of teenagers. So they took on quite a bit when they adopted those kiddos. So we'll get into that a little bit as we go along. But Patrice, for folks that are listening that maybe are not familiar with child welfare, can you describe foster care and its purpose for us?
Sure. So children can come into care for many different reasons. Often, or maybe always, it's because of a family's in crisis. So that can look like domestic violence, abuse, neglect, dependency, things like that. And a report is made typically by a teacher or a doctor, and then there's an investigation. And then if the child is found to be in an unsafe environment, they're removed to care. Ideally, they go with a relative, someone they know, but when that's not available, then they'll come into care, into a community foster home.
Okay. And so when each child then comes into care, really they start out with reunification, so going back home as their initial case plan, right?
Yes, that's right. So always, or almost always, especially if it's a kid first in care, their plan is reunification. So the parents or the mom or dad, whoever's involved, is working a case plan to try to get their life in a stable and safe place so that child can come back home.
Right. So foster care is designed to be a temporary help to a family in need and a safe and dependable place for a child to live until hopefully they can be reunited. And so is there a need, Patrice, for more foster families? Because I know in North Carolina, at any given time, we can have 13, 14, 15,000 kids in foster care. So do we need more foster families?
Yes. That answer will probably always be yes, unfortunately. They're just children coming into care for all kinds of reasons, and there are not enough families and homes to accommodate them. like Holly said, can be on any given day 12,000 or more children in care in North Carolina. And I heard our CEO say at an event this past week that Crossnore is turning down right now 100 children per month is our current statistic, just because we don't have the homes and the families to care for them.
Right. And so Blair, you and Patrice have both adopted, but you've adopted most recently. So for children then who their case plan changes and they're not going to reunify with their families, then maybe adoption becomes a choice. So what happens when a child becomes eligible for adoption?
Sure. The important thing about talking about foster care is that this is personal and different for every family. So while we might say some statements that are pretty broad, we recognize that there are always exceptions to what we consider the rule. So in general, a child usually doesn't become what we call legally free for adoption until they have been in foster care for 1 year. So the 1 year mark gives their biological parents enough time to work a case plan, be it receive substance use treatment or take parenting classes or, help work through domestic violence situations, whatever it might be that their caseworker has laid out for them to do. The year mark gives them time to do that. Mm-hmm. So based on the court's decision alone, the child's plan can be changed to adoption. And then they're what we call legally free, which just means that they are available for adoption.
I appreciate that explanation. And if you want to know more, you can check out our website, and there's more information there about both foster care and adoption. But I wanted to kind of lead into that today because you guys both have fostered and adopted. And what I'm really wanted you guys to talk about is kind of some questions I'll ask you about your experiences there. But I thought it was important to sort of have that groundwork, for folks that may not really be familiar with how the system actually works. And so while your experiences were both very different in the foster to adopt process, why don't y'all maybe take a few minutes and tell us what you feel comfortable about telling us about your own family situation. Patrice, I'll ask you first, because you were able to adopt a young child.
Yeah, so our story is a little bit crazy because that wasn't necessarily the plan. Mm-hmm. Our first biological son has a really rare genetic disorder. And so after he was born, we just knew that wasn't going to be an option for us to continue having our own biological children. And so we looked at several different avenues to grow our family. International adoption is, being paired with a birth mother and that sort of thing. And it was really just on my heart. And I told my husband, I was like, look, there's just kids out there already, who need families. I don't want to travel. I don't want to be away from Jonah, our biological child. I don't, and I don't want to have to go through some gamut to get picked, but what we had originally planned, we knew that sibling pairs were harder to place and that non-babies were harder to place. And so we actually went into it thinking we would adopt an elementary set of siblings. So, likely 2 boys or something like that in elementary school. And so we started the process. We went through a licensing process. And then all of a sudden we got a call about a 2-day-old newborn. And we were like, what? That's not the plan, And but this was a child in need. We said yes. And we quickly put a bassinet in our bedroom. And we're like, well, those bunk beds aren't going to do us much good right now. And so we took Gideon home from the hospital when he was 2 days old. And it was a foster care situation. We finally adopted him when he was 2.5. So for the first year or so, his mother was working a plan and we were doing visitations. And then after that, it probably took another year for all the paperwork to go through and for us to adopt him. But it was not the typical plan or the original plan that we had.
Yeah. So you went through that process then that Blair described, where you provided foster care and worked with the DSS worker and with the mom to hopefully reunify, and then that just didn't work out. Yeah. And so say a little bit more about, this wasn't your plan, but it's where you landed.
Sure. Yeah, so I don't think it's a typical thing necessarily to, get a baby first thing and it go to adoption. I mean, I think that maybe that's the exception rather than the rule. And I even look back at my experience and think, we went into foster care to grow our family, which is actually kind of, I don't know, now I look at it and it's not wrong or bad. It's just not necessarily how I view foster care now. I think going into it now, I would be more going into foster care to be a stand in the gap situation for a child who needs safety and stability in the interim, and if it went to adoption like Gideon's case did, then of course, we would have been open to it. But my whole view of foster care now has shifted a little bit. And I know a lot more. I mean, even after going through the training, I did not go through the training with Crossnore. I went through it with someone else. And I just don't think that I was really prepared or well prepared for the true purpose of foster care, that it is, more of an interim safety and stability type situation. I mean, of course, we're blessed and thankful that it ended up with adoption for Gideon. And he's, as part of our lives as our bio son, and nothing feels different. But that's not necessarily like how we thought it would go.
Yeah. And I love the fact that you guys were open for, what came along. And so you knew that you wanted to grow your family through adoption, but you were also willing to foster, and, had it turned out differently for Gideon, that you would have followed through with that. But then when it was time for adoption, you were like, okay, that's what we'll do. So I just appreciate that openness to kind of work within the system and work for what's best for the child. And in your situation, it worked out that adoption was best for Gideon. So I appreciate that. So Blair, your experience is one of adopting almost grown kiddos. So tell us what you will about that.
Yeah, that's right. So we actually initially met our children in 2017 when they lived here at Crossnore, and I worked with them. I was their case manager and fought really hard for them to go home to their biological dad because he had worked really hard on his case plan. And we have no hesitation talking positively about their dad because he's been lovely in our lives and for them. And so like a lot of biological parents, he had gone through some really hard things. And so he had worked really hard to grow and learn, and he had done really well. So our kids were returned home in 2018, and in early 2019, they came back into custody, and he actually reached out to me. So the biological father called me in early 2019 and asked us if we would adopt them. And at that time, my husband and I were living in a tiny one-bedroom apartment, and thus it was not possible for us to adopt them. But for whatever reason, I didn't say no. I said, it's not really possible right now, but, I want to know how they're doing, keep me up to date, all of that. So in fall of 2019, we had moved into a 2-bedroom apartment, and we had decided we were going to take the foster care class. But at that point, it was a 2-bedroom apartment. And obviously it was 3 children, so that was not going to be enough space for us. And so at that point, we started the class, and the children reached out to us directly and said, today in court, we were told we were never going back to our biological dad. The judge asked us if there's anywhere else we wanted to live, and we said we wanted to live with you. And we said, wow. Okay. And when children call and tell you that they told the judge they want to live with you, that is usually not the time to say no. Yeah. So we prayed about it, and ironically, we were already in the class. And so a crazy turn of events, we looked for a house. We made an offer on a house. We ended up buying the house really quickly. And all in a matter of months, the children moved in. And this was their second time in foster care. So not always, but sometimes the second time around is shorter, and that the biological parents don't have a full year to complete their case plan. And so sometimes the parental rights can be terminated, which means the court proves that the biological parents are not able to have their children returned, or the biological parents can choose to relinquish their rights, which means they sign over their parental rights directly to the pre-adopted family. And for our case, that was what happened. Since we had such a good relationship with their biological dad, he was willing to sign over their rights to us. our children moved in one at a time, which is a common practice, just to help a family kind of negotiate adding children instead of 3 at one time, 1 at a time. So the first one moved in October of 2019, the second one in December of 2019, and the third one in January of 2020. And by the end of April of 2020, they were all adopted, which is a very quick timeline. Very uncommon. But like you mentioned, our children were teenagers. And so for our case in particular, we were kind of racing the clock to get everyone adopted before anyone was 18.
Yeah. And I think part of your story, Blair, is the opportunity to help those siblings stay together.
Yeah, that's right.
Did that factor into your decision to take all 3 of them?
Yeah, similar to Patrice. Ironically, early on, we were like, we will probably take 2 children in elementary school. And so we weren't necessarily ready and mentally ready for 3 teenagers. But of course, when these are 3 kids, they're biological siblings. And they brought our name up in court because in their mind, we were their best, most possible option. And their biological family likes to remind them that sometimes in front of us, they'll say, if it wasn't for them, you 3 wouldn't have been together. And we do kind of feel that way because it is pretty uncommon for a family to take 3 siblings.
Yeah, especially because you guys weren't parents at all.
That's right.
At that point. So, and like I said, not really old enough to have teenagers. So,
That's right. But thankfully, the courts say if you're 21 and you're stable, you can be a foster parent.
You can be a foster parent. Yeah. Even if you're.
I will say that stable feels relative on any given day to me,
Yeah, that's right.
Absolutely. Well, I love that part of your story, Blair, you and Eric, and just your willingness to, again, be open to what came to you and to be open to the needs of the children in your care, which is what you guys have done, what Patrice and Matt did. I just think that's super important for anybody thinking about sort of starting down this road, is that it's super easy. And I've not done it, so I've just based kind of on what you guys have said, other folks that I know, I think it's easy to sort of get into, well, this is what we'll do and it'll happen like this. And it doesn't always happen like that, so, as the 2 of you have attested to. So that just incredible stories from both of you. And I'm so grateful for you and for your families and for what you guys have done. Patrice, what would you say to encourage folks to consider either foster care alone, which is a huge need that we have, or even for those families that want to foster to adopt, like both you and Blair did? What would you say to encourage people that are considering this at all?
So I think about this a lot, and I don't know that I'm better in writing sometimes than in speaking, but I do feel like it's not about us. I think that's the thing that I come back to over and over again when I think about foster care and being a foster to adopt mother, or just, working at Crossnore in communications. Like, it's not about us. And that's a hard place to get to, but really, like, if you're starting the foster care journey, whether it's just to foster or foster to adopt, it's not about you. And I think that that is just a shift in perspective. That kids need us, like they just need us. And the risk of our hearts being broken is minimal compared to the risk that they will go through their lives without having any kind of attachment or belonging or stability and safety. Yeah, maybe I'll get heartbroken, but in the end, that child has a changed trajectory, a different life path, because of my sacrifice, and that's what it comes back to for me when I think about it.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Blair, in your time working in foster care and adoptions, did you hear that from people that maybe they were concerned about, I don't know how I could let kids go if they left my home after living for a while, or, concern about sort of that heartbreak that Patrice mentioned?
Yeah, for sure. I worked in particular with one family who had 3 children placed in their home from 2 separate families. So 2 children from one family and 1 child from another. And they were kind of raised as siblings they were little, and they assumed one another as siblings. And the one child was reunified at home, and the two were adopted. And that was really, really hard for that family to come to peace with, this is how this happens, and we support the biological family for this one child while knowing that adoption was right for these other two. And you have to have support to navigate that. And so thankfully, the adoptive family's parents and siblings, and they had such a strong support system that I was able to walk through with them. And it's hard to say, but it's almost like losing a child in a way, because you have raised this child in your home. And it's a parallel process to what those biological parents are feeling when their children are removed initially. And so I like to think of foster and adoptive parents as a buffer sometimes, or like a bumper, in hopes that if we can take the brunt of some of the trauma that these children have faced, then maybe less of it will affect their lives long term. And trauma in any form is super painful. And so for a lot of our foster families and adoptive families, some aspect of the process will be the hardest thing you will ever do in your life. And so it's rare that the hardest thing in your life is not also extremely rewarding. And so we hope that both can be true, even though some seasons are full of suffering, but we hope that there also are seasons of joy.
Yeah, that is so true.
That made me want to cry a little bit.
I know. But yeah, I mean, I think what you said, Blair, about sort of buffering, I think that the opportunity maybe for us to buffer a little bit of that the kids go through, hopefully as adults, we maybe have a little more resources, than the children have that we can draw on. And so if we can be that buffering for them, whatever, as they make those transitions, whatever they are, as they leave foster care, ultimately, we can help them, navigate that and mitigate some of the maybe the trauma that they feel. So you did mention, Blair, struggling, that it's not always easy. And I can only imagine, adopting 3 teenagers is not the easiest way to go about this. But I've seen, as you also mentioned, great joy, and I've seen that great joy in your face as well. So what would you say to families who do struggle in this process, maybe who need some extra support?
Yeah. I wrote this down because this is a question I've had and thought a lot about, because for me, there was very few things that were super helpful to me in the process when it's the hardest. And something that I kept coming back to is why we started, why we said yes in the first place, which is always a great reminder of, why did you initially want to help? Was it because you felt like you were called to it, or it was the right thing to do, or you had space in your home and your heart, whatever that was, can carry you through some of those really hard times, why you started doing that. I think it's also really humbling that we have to ask for help consistently, sometimes daily, be it, we need therapists for ourselves, or we need neighbors who will bring us dinner, or we need our family friends who can babysit for a night, whatever it is, asking for help and, for breaks. And then lastly, not giving up. And so I know that's such a generic phrase to say, but as much as we can to continue to buffer and love and provide consistency and attachment, that is going to improve and help these children in the long run and their future success. And so sometimes giving up feels giving up being, not allowing the child to remain in your home, or whatever that may look like. That seems like the only option, because it's so hard. And I have felt that way because it has been so hard. And for me, just to zoom in a little bit to today, to the next 12 hours, and then the next 12. And how will I get through these 12 and then the next 12? Yeah. And in my walk, it was helpful to see how the right people to encourage me and to help me and to give me breaks were there through the whole process, because we could have never done this as 2 adult people raising 2 teenagers.
Yeah, I appreciate that reminder that it's okay to ask for help. And, and one of the departments that I supervise here at Crossnore is our Fostering Communities Department. And that's the whole goal of our Fostering Communities Department, is to provide some supportive networks around foster families and the children they care for. And so, whether it's fostering through Crossnore and having your own Crossnore caseworker and our own call system and the support that we can offer, to those foster parents, or if you are interested in helping provide that support network, then Fostering Communities is a great way to go too if you can't foster yourself. So there certainly are lots of ways to help, and it's okay to ask for help. So thank you, Blair, for that reminder for sure. Well, Blair and Patrice both, I just want to say thank you so much for sharing your stories with us today, for letting us have a little bit of glimpse into your life, into your hearts, and the life of your family, and hopefully encouraging some folks along the way. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Well,
I would say, sorry, I was just going to say, I did not go through this process with Crossnore, and now being a Cross employee and seeing our licensing and the way we walk with families and the support networks we put around families, it's really just amazing. And I feel like, yes, foster care, the system has its flaws, but Crossnore does whatever they can to make it as smooth as possible. And I really do. I've enjoyed getting to see that side of it.
Yeah, it's a different perspective. You sort of had both perspectives, both as a foster and adoptive parent, but now also working in the child welfare system. So thank you for that too, Patrice. Thank you guys again for being here today. Well, as I've thanked our guests for today, let me also say thanks to each of you who are watching or listening. We really appreciate the opportunity to tell you about Crossnore. And again, for more information, please visit our website at crossnore.org or follow us on our social media channels on Facebook, Instagram, or LinkedIn. That's it for today, but I hope that you will join us again next week on The Way Home.